Along with you.
All right. I don't know what page this is. On my book, it's 496,
Hmm.
but I don't think that's where it is in your book. We are on, what's the name of this chapter? Chapter 15, Last Visit to Keshav. And we're a good ways in there. We're on the paragraph that starts with the master saying, "My mother, who is my mother?" Oh, and here's two more people. Just a moment. Here comes Sarah and Lalita. Hello, Lalita. Hello,
Hello.
Sarah. Oh, all right. So we're talking with the master here, and he was talking about the pairs of opposites when we closed last week. He was talking about how you can't think of, well, he wasn't really talking about the pairs of opposites, but he was talking about fire and its power to burn. The father, you can't think of the father without implying the mother. You can't think of Shakti. He's talking about how Shakti and Prakriti really are the same, uh, but different, which means they aren't separate, but you can talk about them separately. The way I think about this to kind of just help these things make sense in my mind, so I don't have to hold a dozen paradoxes in my mind, is this idea of fire and its power to burn. The reason we see those things as two is because it's coming in through two different senses, right? The fire's power to burn comes in through the skin. You feel that heat, but fire itself you see with your eyes. And so for us, because of our perspective, it seems like multiple rather than just a singular. And so hence the whole world. Because we are created with a mind that gathers information from five senses, we've created a world of multiplicity. We see difference in everything. And then egoism, which is the little spark that is set off by that mistake of believing ourselves to be this instrument. Uh, its task is constantly to notice difference and to categorize. That's all it does. That's what the mind does. That's the definition of egoism. It separates and categorizes, puts everything in its relative space, and so hence we live in a relative world. So now Master wants to talk about mother, though. He's talking to Keshav, who's a very close friend of his and the leader of that movement, the Brahmo Samaj, the Brahmos, and they are a kind of a reform movement within Hinduism that was very, very popular at the time of Ramakrishna. It's still around, but not really with the same pizzazz that it had back then. So, mother, who is my mother? Ah, she's the mother of the universe. It is she who creates and preserves the world, who always protects her children, and who grants whatever they desire: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. A true son cannot live away from his mother. The mother knows everything. The child only eats, drinks, and makes merry. He doesn't worry himself about the things of the world. He's painting a beautiful description of his own relationship with the Divine Mother in his spiritual life. That really he has surrendered to Mother. That is the only way that one can actually have that kind of relationship with God, with the divine, is through surrender, a true surrender inside, and to have a true knowledge of who you are, that you are of love and wisdom and being, that is your fundamental nature. And so if you know who you are, those three attributes, if you know those are fundamentally the principle that is you, and you have a full surrender to the divine will, to the world, the universe at large. You see yourself as an integrated part of the universe. If you have those two things in place, that surrender and that knowledge of who you are, then really this world for you is play. You can really just go out and not worry about things, because knowing who you are will inspire you in the right direction to move and act in love and in wisdom, and that surrender also will keep you constantly open to what is being presented to you. There'll be no resistance in your approach to life. Life brings you whatever it brings you in the moment. You take that, and using your nature, you create love. You create gold out of it, and you offer it back in play to the universe. I remember going out and looking for flowers for my own earthly mother when I was, I don't know, 12, and picking a bunch of dandelions. And then, on dandelions, if you peel the stems and then stick them in water, they curl up real tight, like tight little kinky curls. And so I had done a whole frisbee's worth of these flowers that I had picked and done that too. And I remember taking that frisbee full of water to my mother to give them this worthless, absolute worthless gift to my mother, but she was thrilled to death with that. And that's how Thakur lived in this world. He just took everything that he took was a gift to mother. Everything that he saw, he would take it, add his character, his love, his wisdom, his nature to it, and then give it back to the Divine Mother. And because of that relationship, because of that surrender, because of that faith in the knowledge of who he was, he did not have to worry himself about things of the world. He didn't have to wonder how things were going to work out. Mother took care of him. Mother watched out for his needs. She brought him teachers. She showed him metaphors that he could use in his teaching. He was always discerning in his mind, so he was taking the world apart constantly to find its essence, to see his mother behind it all. And so Keshav, after hearing him say this, says, yes, sir, that is quite true. That is quite true. And while talking, Sri Ramakrishna regained the normal consciousness of the world. So he had been, whenever he talks about mother, he goes into that divine mood. He's not fully present in the world because he's literally seeing God, literally seeing the Divine Mother everywhere and in everything. So he's slowly regaining this normal consciousness of the world. And with a smile on his face, he conversed with Keshav. The room full of men watched them eagerly and listened to their words. Everybody was amazed to find that neither Keshav nor the master inquired about each other's health. They talked only of God. This is very interesting because Keshav is quite sick at this point, I believe, and and not doing well, in danger of leaving the world. And they were best friends. They were very close to each other. And so it is rather striking. It shows you what it means when two people who are not attached to the body do not see themselves as being the body or the mind, that when they get together, they don't talk about their bodies. That doesn't even occur to them, even if one of them is desperately ill, because they're just very clear. They have had the experience, they have the working knowledge of not being body mind. And so they just leave those things as they are. So that's a great painting right there to look at, to understand what detachment looks like. It's not that they didn't care about each other. Of course not. It's that they knew each other beyond body, And so they loved each other deeply, but that wouldn't involve asking each other, oh, how's your hair doing? Did you shave that upper lip, Priya? So the master says to Keshav, why do members of the Brahmo Samaj dwell so much on God's glories? Right? Is there any great need of repeating such things as, oh God, you have created the moon and the sun and the stars? Most people are filled with admiration for the garden only. How few care to see its owner? Who is greater, the garden or its owner? After a few drinks at a tavern, do I care to know how many gallons of wine are stored there? One bottle is enough for me. I have to tell you, when I read things like this by Ramakrishna, he and I are bar buds, I just have to say, I love the fact that he just doesn't have any pretenses about himself, And he just brings up the bar and drinking, and uses it as a metaphor, just like he uses anything else. And I love that he lives in a world where there is no purity and impurity, because he lives in a world that sees resigned to the Divine Mother, and he lives in a world from the vantage point of being love and wisdom. And so for him, all of those things, they're just it's just not like that for him. The world is God, this experience is divine, and everything can be talked about in that light, in that disposition. But here he's wondering, why do we pay so much attention to the glories of God? God and his glory, especially in modern day Christianity anyway. We got tons of good songs about the glory of God. We've got, and that's really such a, his power is talked about so much, his greatness is talked about so much. And Ramakrishna is saying, there's something much more about God. To talk about those things means that you haven't met him or her yet. You haven't seen that reality yet. If you saw God for God, you wouldn't care about all this stuff. This stuff would be mere pointers to something much more beautiful, much more lovely, much more engaging. Right? And that's what he says. He says, after a few drinks in the tavern, do I have to care about how many gallons of wine are stored there? One bottle is enough for me. So the experience of God, this is what we're after in our day-to-day life here. Experiencing life with the company of God, in the presence of the divine, to become aware of that reality that we're in all the time, so that we can walk freely in this world, guilelessly, without anxieties, without regrets, without fears, with an ample amount of compassion and love to carry us through every day. So we should see God in that personal way, in that direct context sort of way. We can know God as the big and the great, but that one drink is enough for me. Bring God here. Enjoy God in your life. Let all of the rest of this stuff fall in its place in time, but live in the experience of the beloved, of the divine. When I met Narendra, who was Swami Vivekananda, or became Swami Vivekananda, I never asked him, who is your father? How many houses does he own? Right? So he's drawing the picture even more. You see why it doesn't make sense? Because this is a personal relationship with you and God. You're not going to talk to him about all of his things, all of his powers, all of his whatnots. It's like there's a relationship going on there. There's something much more personal going on there. And so he says, when I met Narendra, I didn't ask him about his father, and I didn't ask him how many houses does he own. That's not what friends do. That's not what people who know each other talk about necessarily. Shall I tell you the truth? Man loves his own riches, and so he thinks that God loves his too. He thinks that God will be pleased if we glorify his riches. Once some who said to me, please bless me, that I may die leaving my riches at the lotus feet of God. I answered, these riches are riches only to you. What riches can you afford to offer God? To him, these are mere dust and straw. Right? There's a couple of really wonderful things in there for us. One is that we understand that when we think of God, we project ourselves, right? That's why it's a crazy notion in this world to talk about God, really, in that sense, because no two people are going to have the same idea of what God is. And your own idea of God changes radically from morning to night every day. And so we have to know, and we have to be careful through this inner discernment to know what God is, because that determines the nature of our relationship with the divine. If we're stuck in that mode where God is this jealous, angry God in the sky who's pointing his finger, keeping tracks of rights and wrongs, and is watching you at every second, prepared to drop you into the big burner on the stove when it's over, that's going to mark a very different relationship with God from one that knows God as love, that knows God as an unconditioned lover, that knows God as mercy and knows God as freedom. That is going to color you very differently. If you see God only as a man, that's going to change the way that you interact with the divine. If you know that God is equally a woman, that God is equally a child, that God is equally a grandmother, and can manifest fully as all of those things, that will deepen your relationship. So understand, be careful how you project God. And when you think of God, check yourself every now and then. The way that I really helped myself with this idea, because I grew up with a lot of weird ideas about God, but in that 1 Corinthians 13 verse that I talk about frequently, chapter 13 verses 1-8, where Paul talks about what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, love keeps no record of wrongs, love always hopes, always believes, always trusts, love never fails. To use a scripture like that or a notion like that to check your idea of God, because in that one it says God keeps no record of wrongs. Love keeps no record of wrongs. So by nature, God is love. So that can't be God, right? God can't keep a record of wrongs. And so we have to purify our own ideas of what the divine is. And through that purifying our ideas of what the divine is, we come closer into touch with what we are, right? Because we also are that love. We are that image of our divine beloved reflecting in mind. That's what we are. And so the purer that we know God, the purer we know ourselves. And it might be the other way around. The more purely we know ourselves, the more purely we know God. Because they're not two different things there. So we have that notion going on. But then we also have this notion of judging what is good and bad, in the sense that we think that God is happy if we praise him for this beautiful sun and this beautiful mountain and this beautiful flower, because God, of course, was just like a human being who's very proud of the things he owns and proud of the things that he's done. Not so. God doesn't actually create this in that sense. When God is, this is, right? He's independent of all of that. God is always beautiful. God is always in love. God is always kind. God is always hopeful. God is always positive. These aren't attributes of actions on his. They're not developments of his. They are. He is that. God is principle. We are the action of that principle. And so he says, when you go to praise God, that really will show you what you value. What you think God is worth praising for, that shows you what you value, right? And this is a real sticky one, because when it gets to karma, we think it's very easy to say, oh, that's good karma and that's bad karma, right? Because, well, being rich is good. So if God makes you rich, you've got good karma. That may not at all be true. That money could be the rope that's hanging you, It could be that you have terrible karma, and so you've got lots of money. Money in and of itself is nothing. It's not positive, it's not negative. It doesn't take on qualities of value until it meets you, until you do something with it, or till you react to it, right? And so understand that this world that you live in, things are not good or bad, right or wrong, positive or negative, until they meet you. That gives you a lot of power. That allows you to take bad things in your life and turn them into beautiful things. Oops. Let me mute everyone here.
I'm sorry. I'm
No
sorry.
worries. No worries.
I'm having trouble with launching the meeting.
No,
Ugh,
no problem.
I'm
No worries. All right. So this is important, because as we grow in spirit, as we grow as humans, two things are happening. Not only are we becoming aware of what we are, but simultaneously we are becoming aware of the nature of the divine, the nature of God. And that seems dual right now, because we're in mind and God is in heart, just as a metaphor. And ultimately we'll be in the same place, and we'll know the oneness of all things. But you can kind of see how he's talking and bringing this to light for Keshav here. He's saying, why do you guys praise God for all of these things as if God's attached to these things like we are? You know, bring it down to the more personal in there. And then, you know, why do we think that God values the same things that we value as body mind? You know, that he thinks that he wants these things. He goes on to tell a story. He says, once a thief broke into the temple of Vishnu and robbed the image of its jewels. Mathur Babu and I went to the temple to see what was the matter. Addressing the image, Matu said bitterly, what a shame, Lord, you are worthless. The thief took all the ornaments from your body and you couldn't do a thing about it. Thereupon I said to Mathur, shame on you. How improper your words are. To God, the jewels you talk so much about are only lumps of clay. Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, is his consort. Do you mean to say that he should spend sleepless nights because a thief has taken a few rupees? You mustn't say such things. Right? Now, this is an important factor right here, because we're all wrestling with God, right? We're all wrestling with God. And we don't know who God is as of this point, perhaps. Maybe some of you do. Maybe some do. Who knows? But the notion is, the fact of the matter is that if you have a wrong idea of God, you can say something like this. You know, Mathur looks at him and says, well, this guy came in and robbed you of all your jewels. You're the God of the universe. What, you just sat there and let him happen, where you couldn't even defend yourself, couldn't even protect these jewels, you know, from being stolen? It's like, oh, you're weak and you're worthless, and he could walk away and not think about God again for the rest of his life, because he would draw a conclusion like that. But see, there's much more to know. God doesn't care. Those stones were nothing more than stones. You know, how many stones does he have in the universe? And just because those jewels moved from here to there doesn't mean that they were taken away from the divine either. And so you see, before we draw judgments on our relationship with God or react to God as a person in ways that we get angry with him, or that we're sick and tired of him, or that he proves himself to be unreal, or whatever the soup du jour might be for us to drink, always be at least cautious about that. Not because you're going to do something wrong, but you might do something unhelpful for yourself. You know, you might cut off your own finger and give yourself a very difficult situation because you were speaking it without understanding. And so always, you know, whenever we talk about God, whenever we're saying something about God, you should say God is loving and more. You know, God is compassionate and more. God is wisdom and more. Always know that God can never stop at a word. You can't ever just say God is this, because God, the divine, the principle, is without limit. And any description is a restriction. If you say God is male, that means he's not female. It means he's not transgender. It means that he's not this or that or any of the others. But in fact, God has become all of this. So God is transgender. God is gay. God is straight. God is beautiful. God is ugly. You know, all of those things. But those are all just...
God is kind and God is unkind, cruel too.
Yes, because the value, like we said, the actions of God don't have a value until they meet you. And if you feel like it's cruelty, if its effect on you is cruelty, then for you it's cruel. You know, if yeah, I mean, it's like that. And so, but everything, we have to understand the way to work through this. It's a difficult teaching. It's a challenge for sure. But we have to learn to live in this world with a deep faith in that everything that is happening is rooted in love somehow. And that is our inner discernment, is to look at something that may seem horrible on the surface, but then ask myself, why do I view it as horrible? Is it because I think I'm a body and that's a horrible thing for a body? Is it because I think I'm a mind and that's a horrible thing for the mind? But if I'm a self, if I'm a soul, if I'm spirit, and I'm without boundary, and I'm without limitation, and I'm immortal and ever free, do I judge that in the same way from that perspective? For me, it's not all right. It's not all right to see that perspective and then not care about somebody who doesn't see that perspective. That's empathy and compassion, So we don't get in there and point fingers at them and say, oh, don't cry, you silly, you're immortal, get over it. And you might if that's where the person's at, but most people that's not. Most people, they just want you to sit there and be with them, right? And so this is the source of our compassion, right? But always, always know that God is more wonderful than you can imagine, more delightful, more challenging, more difficult, more all of it in every way. And all of it's going to come down to who are you, right? All of it's going to come down to what you think of yourself. That's going to determine how you value or devalue the divine principle. It'll be up to you. Can one ever bring God under control through wealth? Can he be tamed? He can be tamed only through love. What does he want? Certainly not wealth. He wants from his devotees love, devotion, feeling, discernment, and renunciation. Right? He wants clarity. He wants you to see things as they are, to understand things as they are. He wants you to know that you're free. He wants you to know that you are composed of love and that you are composed of wisdom. And he wants to dance with you as you are being, as you are emanating those divine qualities of yourself. That's the desire of God. And Ramakrishna says in another place that that's the reason he doesn't give very many people pure love for him. He says, because when God gives somebody pure love for him, he's enslaved to that person. That's how Ramakrishna talks. God can only be tamed by love, can only be controlled by love. So if you want to control God, if you want to be sure to get something, make sure that you want it because of love. And not love from the perspective of a body-mind, but love for its own sake's perspective. Then you can know you can have it. I remember when I first joined the monastery, Greg told me, he says, now, if you ever need anything, if you ever need a new computer or you want a new shirt or a new something, he says, if you go to Swami and say that you want it, that it's for you or for the monastery, he says, you'll never get it. The Swami will just say no. So anything that you think you need for the monastery, come up with some way that it's going to benefit the devotees, and then Swami will let you have it. So in that same way, if you could, do you remember telling me that, Greg? That was back, I was a brahmachari. So my big brother was teaching me all the ways of the world back then. So anyway, this notion, just understand the nature of God is love. And that's the only thing that God is concerned about as the personal God, right? God is not even concerned about that in the ultimate sense, because everything is perfect from that non-perspective of God. Everything is always perfect. Everything always is unchanging. It is as it is and always is. One looks on God exactly according to one's own inner feeling, right? So it's the condition of your mind that's going to give you the condition of the world, that's going to give you the condition of others, going to give you the condition of God. One looks on God exactly according to one's own inner feeling. Take, for instance, a devotee with an excess of tamas. That's a lazy devotee, someone who's given to inertia. He thinks that the Divine Mother eats goat, right? So he goes and sacrifices a goat and gives her that meat because he thinks that God is tamasic, right? And eating meat under those conditions would be a tamasic action. So he slaughters one for her. Again, the devotee endowed with rajas, the one who's very active, always needing to move and do. The devotee endowed with rajas cooks rice and various other dishes for the mother. But the sattvic devotee, the devotee who's got just the right balance between action and inertia inside, the sattvic devotee doesn't make any outer show of his worship. People don't even know that he is worshiping. If he has no flowers, he worships God with mere Ganges water and the leaves of the bel tree. His food offering to the deity consists of sweetened puffed rice or a few candies. Occasionally, he cooks a little rice pudding for the deity. There is also another class of devotees, those who are beyond the three gunas, those who have transcended being mind and body. They have the nature of a child. Their worship consists in chanting God's name, just his name. They don't feel like they have to go get anything or do anything special or perform any big whatnot. There doesn't have to be any grandiose action on their part. Just singing the name, just being in the presence, just like a little kid, just being there, enjoying the company. To catch up with a smile. Why is it that you are ill? There is a reason for it. Many spiritual feelings have passed through your body, therefore it has fallen ill. At the time an emotion is aroused, one understands very little about it. The blow that it delivers to the body is felt after only a long while. I have seen big steamers going by on the Ganges, at the time hardly noticing their passing. But oh my, what a terrific noise is heard after a while, when the waves splash against the banks. Perhaps a piece of the bank breaks loose and falls into the water. So he's telling, he's talking about a level of spirituality that isn't common to most of us. This notion that these divine ecstasies that pass through the body, these currents of a very pure love that, cause the body to literally short circuit, to shut down, as it's overwhelmed, overpowered by the nature of God, by the presence of the divine. And so that takes a toll on the body. It burns the body out, actually. It overruns it, as it were. And so he's saying, that this is the reason that your body is breaking down, is because you've had these divine ecstasies and you've seen God, and your inner experience is becoming too grand, too big for the body, becoming too powerful for the body to contain. He gives another example. An elephant entering a hut creates havoc within it and ultimately shakes it clear down to the ground. The elephant of divine emotion enters the hut of this body and shatters it to pieces. Right? So it's not just day-to-day activity that wears us down into haggard old folks. It's also our having a great spiritual practice. But of course, the great spiritual practice will take you out of body. So even though if the body's falling, like we see in Ramakrishna when he was on his deathbed and goes and chases the snake away, remember that story? And so he's not subject to body. Somebody who's having divine ecstasies and somebody who's experiencing samadhi, yes, they're wearing the body out, but they're not suffering for it because they know themselves not to be that. And so when he was laying on his deathbed, and he knew that there was a snake over by the water tank where the boys were going over to take a bath, he ran out the back door. Mother saw him run down the flight of stairs and run out the back door and run all the way over to the bathing ghat and scold the snake and tell the snake to leave those boys alone and go somewhere else. And then he runs all the way back and gets back to the business of dying. gets back on his deathbed again. And so, see, that's the difference. For us, wearing out our body through daily action, we suffer for it because we're deeply attached to it. And so we experience old age. If we knew in ourselves that we were not this body, then we would not take on the characteristics of this body as being ours. And so we, even in our old age, could jump up and run or jump up and do whatever needs to be done, because the body in its true essence is just the dream of God. It's not a thing in and of itself. And so this falls in line with when Jesus says, if you say to this mountain, get up and throw yourself in the sea, I tell you the truth, verily, it will take itself and throw itself in the sea. right? And so understand that the nature of this world does not control you. Now, at our level, that's just a trinket. That's just a nice, cool thing to think about. But know it to be true. And one day you will see it. You will know it. That is enlightenment. When you know yourself not to be in the dream, but to have the dream in you. To know yourself as the dreamer and not the dreamed. This world becomes your own. This world becomes your play. So he just talked about the elephant of divine emotion entering the hut of the body and shattering it to pieces. Do you know what actually happens? When a house is on fire, at first, just a few things inside burn. Then comes the great commotion. Just so, the fire of knowledge at first destroys such enemies of spiritual life, such as passion, anger, lust, and so forth. Then comes the turn of the ego. And lastly, a violent commotion is seen in the physical frame, right? When the body is no longer needed and the ego has been shattered and all of the passions have been not brought under control, because there's no need to control them when you see their lack of, when you're not associated with body mind, you're not affected by the moods of body mind. So after all of this goes, that last violent shuddering, when Vivekananda went into the shrine on that last day and gave up his body on purpose, he had been given that boon from Shiva, if you remember, that he was going to be able to leap. He was able to die when he chose to die. And so when he came to that time where he felt like Thakur's work was finished, he went into the shrine and left the body, and there was a big spot of blood on the top of his head where he had exited, as it were, the body. And so this spiritual life is quite a power. It's quite an amazing thing to experience. And even if we experience it just the small ways, Mother's very kind in that regard. She doesn't give us much because she doesn't want us to become addicted to the feelings and the conditions of spiritual life. She doesn't want us running around after all the trinkets. So she gives them fairly sparingly. But I think probably everybody has a story or two, in the first days, because Mother definitely likes to do it in the early days of spiritual life. She likes to give you a little zing, and then she'll withdraw for 10 years. But that little zing will be something you can't ever forget. You can't walk away from it. So Mother will do that, but she won't dance out there in front of you because she doesn't want you to think that she is a thing of the senses. She doesn't want you to think that she is something to be pursued, right? Because the divine is something to be surrendered into. It's what you are by nature. It's not something to chase. It's not something to attain or acquire. It's something to surrender into. It's what you are. It's your divine nature. So, and lastly, a violent commotion is seen in the physical frame. You may think that everything is going to be over, but God will not release you as long as the slightest trace of your illness is left. What is that illness that we have? Me and mine, right? You can't get out of this game until all traces of me and mine are left behind, right? Now, understand that this is true, and it is as discouraging as it sounds, because that is an impossibility, it seems, to us in our condition. So this, when we understand this, we take this as truth, because this is true. This is as difficult as it is. He's not making it up. He's letting us know this is the truth of it. And what's he doing that for? Not to make you hopeless, right? He's doing it first to ignite a fire in you to do it. And then he's going to bring grace in to catch you when you realize you can't. So, but you have to try, because all of us believe we can do it at some level, right? The ego holds on to that. Oh, I can do this. We can do this. But at some point, we will really know that this can't be done. We will have tried and tried and tried and just had so many miserable failures, and we'll just notice that we are still dealing with so many of these things in ourselves. And at that point, when we really realize we can't do it, we sit down exhausted, and we finally look at Mother and give up, surrender ourselves, let go of everything. And at that point, Mother gives it to you, gives it all to you. Because that egoism, that sense of I can do this, I will do this, had to die before you could accept an infinite gift, infinite grace, right? The gift of infinite grace requires a person of infinite humility to accept it. Otherwise, you would be like, I could never accept that. That's just too big. And you can see that happen in you when somebody says, oh, grace has you covered. God will do everything. We have an immediate like, oh, but no, that can't be. But misunderstanding. It's a dangerous thing to believe that. If you believe that, then, then this, then that, then the other. The mind is set up so that that ego has to keep its firm grasp of being in charge, being in control. So he says, you may think that everything is going to be over, but God will not release you as long as the slightest trace of your illness is left. You simply cannot leave the hospital if your name is registered there. As long as the illness is not perfectly cured, the doctor will not give you the permit to go. Why did you register your name in the hospital at all? Everyone laughs, right? Why did you ever come up with this idea of selfishness? Why did you ever do this to begin with? Keshav laughed again and again at the master's allusion to the hospital. Then Sri Ramakrishna spoke of his own illness to Keshav. Hriday used to say, never before have I seen such ecstasy for God, and never before have I seen such illness. I was then seriously ill with a stubborn diarrhea. It was as if millions of ants were gnawing at my brain. But all the same, spiritual talk went on day and night. Dr. Rama of Natagore was called to see me. He found me discussing spiritual truth. What a madman, he said. Nothing is left of him but a few bones. And still, he's talking about things like that. He's still talking about spiritual life. When is he going to talk about something important? The master to Keshav, everything depends on God's will. Right? And why would he say that? Not because you're going to know what God's will is, ever. Well, you can, because everything that is God's will. So you can see God's will. You just can't anticipate God's will. And so that's where our surrender comes from. And it's also where our faith that will is rooted in love is important, right? So he sings this song, O Mother, all is done by thine own sweet will. You are in truth self-willed, Redeemer of mankind. You work your own work, men only call it theirs. Right? So Mother is doing all of the work. She's doing everything. There's nothing that we're doing. But we, because we have that disease of egoism, we go around saying, I'm doing it. I did that. I've done my practice. I'm a good meditator. I finally controlled myself. Right? So that egoism is always going in there with that I, just wanting to hang those little ornaments of I on everything. I did this, I did this, I did this. Right? But it's living it's living as the witness in this world, living as a witness. And by living as witness, that eliminates egoism because you don't see yourself as the doer. And you watch the body do, and you watch the mind do. And in that clarity, everything is done from your nature. Everything is done through love. Everything is done through wisdom, through this experience of being. In order to take full advantage of the dew, the gardener removes the soil from the Basra rose down to the very root. The plant thrives better on account of that moisture. Perhaps that is why you too are being shaken to your very root. Keshav and the master laugh. It may be that you will do tremendous things when you come back. right? So there's Thakur knowing that any of suffering that Keshav is going through has its root in love. It has a higher purpose. There is something beautiful, inevitable from it. And so he's seeing there, looking at his friend, deathly ill like that, and says, perhaps you are being shaken to the root, so that just like that rose, so that that moisture can get to your roots, and that through that moisture, grand things will happen. Perhaps it will be that you will do tremendous things when you come back. Whenever I hear that you are ill, I become extremely restless. After hearing of your last illness, I used to weep to the Divine Mother in the small hours of the morning. I prayed to her, "O Mother, if anything happens to Keshav, with whom then shall I talk in Calcutta?" Coming to Calcutta, I offered fruits and sweets to the Divine Mother with a prayer for your well-being, Keshav. So he really valued him. Here we see the human side and not just the God side of Ramakrishna. He loved his friend. He didn't want his friend to be sick, whether it was for good and tremendous things or not, right? So that human level coexists with his divine level within, as it does within ourselves. And this is what detachment gives us the key to. The detachment gives us access to our divine self, right? To our divine nature that's not particularized. And at the same time, we can come into the space of being ourself and see and experience the world there also, right? But we have, at different levels of consciousness, the world appears differently in different ways. And so we have access to all of them, but we only see the one that our karma allows. We only live in the one that our karma allows at the moment. The devotees were deeply touched to hear Sri Ramakrishna's love for Keshav and his longing for the Brahmo leader. Master, but this time, to tell the truth, I didn't feel anxious to that extent about your illness. Only for 2 or 3 days did I feel a little worried. Keshav's venerable mother came to the east door of the room, the same door through which Keshav had entered. Umanat said aloud to the master, "Sir, here is mother saluting you." Sri Ramakrishna smiled. Umanat said again, "Mother asks you to bless Keshav that he may be cured of his illness." Oh. So Keshav's mother has glanced in the room. She salutes Ramakrishna. And then she's asking him, will you please, pray that he may be cured of his illness? So Master says to her, please pray to the Divine Mother, who is the bestower of all bliss. She will take away your troubles. Right? So he tells her, don't you worry about me praying for him. You go to the Mother, right? She's the bestower of all bliss. She will take away your troubles. So he takes it from a different angle. He says, go to Mother directly. She may or may not cure Keshav, but she will remove your troubles. She will remove the troubles in the heart. She will give you an understanding, give you a view of what is true. Right? To Keshav, don't spend long hours in the inner apartments. Right? That means don't sit in the family room where everybody is hanging out. You will sink down and down in the company of women, as a man. He's worried about Keshav. He says, you will feel better if you hear only talk of God, right? So don't go in where everybody's talking about the groceries and the budget and finances and how the house is and what needs to be done and all of these things. He says, you're in a space now where you want to keep your mind thinking about the things that are real, things that are behind all of this, and to keep your mind pure and set on those things. So it's a good thing to know, as we grow older, that we should set up more and more opportunity for ourselves to be spiritually minded, to surround ourselves with helpful things, to know that this world, because when you get to a certain age, this world, you really see when it's over, it's over. You really do understand, like, wow, when this body mind drops, there ain't nothing important in this room. There's nothing here for me, right? And so if you haven't touched the divine at that point, life gets empty. Some bitterness will set in, some disappointment will set in, some disillusionment will set in. And so this is why we practice to touch that divinity within yourself, to know it to be real, not an imagination, not a pretense, not a philosophy, but we want to have danced with it and lived with it and practiced with it and poked at it and learned about it, so that in those last days we are in the company of that, in the company of that divine, so that if you are in some miserable condition, can't get out of bed, it won't matter to you, because your heart is God's drawing room, right? And you can sit in that heart with that divine company, soaked in the sugar syrup of divine grace, divine love. And the conditions and circumstances of bodies and minds won't touch you. So don't spend long hours in the inner apartments. You will sink down and down in the company of women. And if he was a woman, he would have said in the company of men. So don't think that he's picking on women. You will feel better if you hear only talk of God. The master uttered these words in a very serious voice and then began to laugh like a boy. He said to Keshab, "Let me see your hand." He waited playfully like a child. At last he said, "No, your hand is light. Hypocrites have heavy hands." Everyone laughs. Umanat again said to the master from the door, "Mother asks you to bless Keshab." Master gravely, "What can I do?" God alone blesses all. Thou workest thine own work, men only call it theirs. God laughs on 2 occasions. He laughs when 2 brothers divide land between them. They put a string across the land and say to each other, "This side is mine and that side is yours." God laughs and says to himself, "Why, this whole universe is mine." And about a little clod they say, "This side is mine and that side is yours." God laughs again when the physician says to the mother, weeping bitterly because of her child's desperate illness, "Don't be afraid, mother, I shall cure your child." The physician does not know that no one can save the child if God wills that he should die. Everyone is silent. Just then Keshab was seized with a fit of coughing, which lasted for a long time. The sight of his suffering made everyone sad. He became exhausted and could stay no longer. He bowed low before the master and left the room, holding to the wall as before. Some refreshments had been arranged for the master, and Keshab's eldest son was seated near him. Amrita introduced the boy and requested Sri Ramakrishna to bless him. The master said, "It is not given to me to bless anyone." With a sweet smile, he stroked the boy's body gently. Amrita with a smile, "All right then, do as you please." The master to the devotees, "I cannot say such a thing as may you be healed. I never ask the Divine Mother to give me the power of healing. I pray to her only for pure love. Is Keshab a small person? He is respected by all, seekers after wealth as well as holy men. Once I visited Dayananda, who was then staying at the garden house. I saw that he was extremely anxious about Keshab's coming. He went out every few minutes to see whether he had arrived. I learned later on that Keshab had made an appointment with him that day. Keshab, I understand, had no faith in the sacrifices and the deities mentioned in the Vedas. Referring to this, Dayananda said, "Why, the Lord has created so many things. Could he not make deities as well?" Continuing, the master said, "Keshab is free from the pride of a small-minded religious teacher. To many people he has said, 'If you have any doubts, go there to have them solved,' meaning to the master. It is my way, too, to say, 'What shall I do with people's respect? Let Keshab's virtues increase a millionfold.' Keshab is certainly a great man. Everyone respects him, seekers after wealth and holy men." Thus did Sri Ramakrishna praise Keshab before the latter's disciples. After partaking of the refreshments, the master was ready to leave. The Brahmo devotees accompanied him to the cab, which was standing in the street. While coming down the stairs, the master noticed that there was no light on the ground floor. He said to Amrita and Keshav's other disciples, "These places should be well lighted. A house without light becomes stricken with poverty. Please see that it doesn't happen again." Then Sri Ramakrishna left for Dakshineshwar with one or two of the devotees. So we see a lot. I mean, it's funny that Mother's bringing so much death into into things for us at this point. But this whole notion of Thakur says he never prayed to be a healer. He never prayed to be in anything, to act as anything as a particular within the dream. You see, within the dream, things cannot be done properly because they are believing in the dream. They are done through the dream. And the dream is an illusion. The dream is unreal and only exists because of a smattering of me and mine that exists in the mind. Right? So Ramakrishna could never ask from inside the dream for a particular thing to be a particular way within the dream because he understood the nature of this. You know, he understood the nature of this. He's like, why would you pray for Keshav to get better? Keshav is going to die one day. Everybody does. You know, why pray for good health? Everybody gets sick. Everybody goes through these cycles. So what do? We surrender. We accept the circumstances and conditions that we're in, and we use the love and the wisdom within us to create an offering to the universe at large, to God, to Mother, to Lover, you know. And so that's how we live in this world. We accept what comes to us. We're in a dream. None of this can be said to be good or bad. It simply is. And so we take what is and we apply our nature of Satchitananda, of love, wisdom, and being. We apply our nature to it and we manifest beauty because that's our nature. And then we offer that beauty so that it doesn't become ego. We offer it to the beloved. And we pick up the next thing that's in front of us. You know, there's always a steady flow of isness coming our way to create and to make beauty with. This is what life is. This is what we do because this is who we are.